Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you another movie review. Now, this film came out in 2022. It was written by Billy Bates and directed by David Pogue, and it has an association with a popular Halloween retail establishment. And the film in question is Spirit Halloween, the movie. Recently, I acquired this Blu-ray from Best Buy. Ironically, not Spirit Halloween, which I called around this past Halloween a few months back to like 4 or 5 locations near me, and none of them got in this Blu-ray that came out in October or September of 2023. Funny, right? The fact that you had to go to Best Buy online to buy a Spirit Halloween movie that's not found in Spirit Halloween. Very weird to think about. But anywho, Spirit Halloween, the movie. So when this movie got announced a few years back, I saw the trailer of it, and immediately I got this Goosebumps vibe from it. And I saw that Christopher Lloyd was all over the trailer. And then when I looked into it, I saw that Rachel Lee Cook, who you might know from the movie Josie and the Pussycats, or She's All That from back in the day in the early 2000s, late 90s. She was also in The Breakfast Club. I was stoked to see it. And seeing Christopher Lloyd, who played Doc in Back to the Future, he played Uncle Fred in When Good Ghouls Go Bad. He played the villain in Dennis the Menace movie back in the 90s. He also played Uncle Fester in the Addams Family films. I was stoked to see Christopher Lloyd, even though he's up there in age, still making movies. He's kind of like the kid's version of Tom Atkins for me. And Tom Atkins in adult horror is like my go-to. Like if he's in anything, I have to watch it. Christopher Lloyd is the same way, but just for kids horror for me. So I was stoked to watch this, and when it was slated to come out, it said it was going to be digital only, and nobody knew if they were going to make a Blu-ray, but they eventually did make it, and I bought it for my physical collection, like I said, from Best Buy, just to have it, right? And I'll say this up front. This movie feels in the same vein, unfortunately, of another film that I recently reviewed, R.L. Stine's Zombie Town, that came out in 2023, just a year after this movie released. But I will say this, I think this film is a notch above it. It has a few things that I prefer in it, even though it does some things poorly compared to the other movie. But I will say this, movies like this in R.L. Stine's Zombie Town, that stars Dan Aykroyd and Chevy Chase, I will take these movies over Goosebumps 2015 clones like The Curse of Bridge Hollow, that's on Netflix, and just some uninspired Disney crap that they keep putting out in the spooky kids horror / family horror subgenre any day. So yeah, let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away. So the movie starts off with a prologue kind of situation. It takes place in the past, and you see this old-fashioned car pull up to this desolate land, and there's this creepy kid humming. It's very foreboding. And you have this woman who's like hanging up clothes on a clothing line and whatnot. And this man comes out the car, and it's Christopher Lloyd, and he's playing a character known as Mr. Windsor. And this guy seems like a real estate tycoon. He's buying up land under the noses of people so he can, I guess, plant shopping malls on the land and trying to like modernize it. Very similar theme that rings a bell to me was a plot point that was touched on quite heavily in the new Are You Afraid of the Dark book, The Tale of the Grave Mother. So I was like, okay, let's see what angle they go with this. So this old man, Windsor, he's talking to this woman who owns this land, and it turns out it might be like an orphanage type of place where she's a caretaker of children. And he said, pretty much reveals to her that he now owns the land and they have to vacate the premises. And the woman's not happy, so she starts to chant a curse or some magic spell, it appears, something to that nature. And after the curse is read, Mr. Windsor drops dead, and then we see like a spirit come out of his body of sort and fly around the land. And then we don't see much of anything after that because it cuts to present day. And this is where you meet the main characters of the story. So as you can see on the cover, you see these three boys and this girl here. Now the three main boys are Jake, Carson, and Bo. And the girl is Carson's sister, Kate. Now, Jake, he and his mom, played by Rachel Lee Cook, have kind of had a hard time over the past year because a year prior, Jake and his mom lost Jake's father to bone cancer. And within that short amount of time, she got remarried to a guy that had a daughter, and now he has a stepsister, and he seems to be latching on to something that connected him to his father. He has like this book of supernatural stuff that his dad gave him, and off the bat you get some really deep sympathy for this kid, even though it kind of goes down that generic coming of age kind of setup, and I think this movie definitely is trying that almost to the bone. Jake is pretty rootable in this film off the bat, and he doesn't really get along with his stepdad. His younger sister, wants to be close with him, but he's kind of, held offish because he's still going through his trauma and all that. And his mom just really wants the best for him. And it's coming up to Halloween, and he's hit a roadblock because he wants to go trick-or-treating, but his best friend Carson and his friend Bo want to attend a Halloween party instead. And Carson thinks that it would be a better idea to do that because his older sister Kate goes to Halloween parties, and they're going to be in high school the next year because in this movie they're 13-year-olds in 8th grade. And they think that it's time to grow up a little. And Jake is still trying to hold on to his youthful innocence because that's what connected him to his father, right? And that's a recurring theme that you'll see throughout the film. But early on, we get to see Jake, hanging out at his friend Carson's house, and you see that he has this crush on Carson's older sister, Kate. And Kate, she's really nice to him, and, she might be like 2 or 3 years older, which is kind of weird. She might be like a junior in high school or something. But she has a crush on a guy, and she wants to go to this party. But before the party can commence, there's like a local costume event down in town at this, I guess, old theater where they're going to reenact this tragedy of Mr. Windsor that's been going around in local legend. So Jake gets dressed up and he goes with his friends to this get together, and they see this puppet show of the tragedy of Mr. Windsor, and Kate happens to be there, and a bunch of high school kids are there, and Carson's like, yeah, we want to go to the party, and Jake kind of throws a fit in front of Carson, and Carson, is really annoyed with it because he's like, maybe we should move on. And this is also a thing that he tries to tell Jake throughout the movie, hey, you need to move past this, but he doesn't know how to say it, right? And Bo's like, well, why don't we stop fighting and why don't we come to an agreement? And for some reason, there is a plot point touched on very briefly during the first few minutes of the film where Rachel Lee Cook is talking to Jake, and she's like, hey, I'm going to take your sister to Spirit Halloween to go buy some costumes to go trick-or-treating. And Jake's like, okay, well, is she going to get something scary? And she wants to be like a fairy princess, right? So Jake's like, well, I got this idea. And he pulls up this picture of Spirit Halloween on Instagram, and he types in booyah or something, and he's like, or bingo. And he's like, this is what we're going to do on Halloween night. Instead of going to a party, we're going to still be young and youthful. We're going to sneak into Spirit Halloween. We're going to hide around, wait till they close, and we're going to spend the night in the building around creepy animatronics. And for some reason, the kids think that this is a good idea, but they just go with it anyway. So it fast forwards to Halloween day, and the kids pretty much prepare. I'm going to skip over a few things that aren't important here. They pretty much prepare to go to the Spirit Halloween store, which basically is this old abandoned Kmart location. Apparently, it looks like it used to be a Kmart, I swear. The building shape and everything looks like it. And that's like a running gag with Spirit Halloweens across America, because in case you don't know, Spirit Halloween is a American, Halloween retail establishment, I think co-owned by Party City, if I'm not mistaken. So they pop up in like old abandoned places. Recently, when Bed Bath & Beyond folded, they started popping up there. So it's a running gag thing, right? But here it looks like an old abandoned Kmart, and it may or may not be on the land from the prologue that we saw Mr. Windsor suffer a curse, right? So it's on Halloween, and they're in Spirit Halloween. It closes down, and then they get out, and they are in the building, and they're like, okay, and they're trying to find some stuff to do, but almost immediately they get greeted by some animatronics that have come to life and are talking. And the kids are like, what's going on? And they're freaking out. They have no cell reception in this building because apparently it's on a part of town that has no cell tower. And Kate, who is about to go out to this party, is trying to get a hold of her brother, but he's not answering the phone. And she decides to go over to Jake's house just to make sure that Carson, her younger brother, and Bo, who have all said that they're going to be at Jake's house, or I guess Bo's house, I think. And I should mention something about Bo in just a second. But she goes there, and there's like a little communication of words where she realizes, at least Kate realizes, that her brother and Jake and Bo lied to her. So Bo, the whole thing about Bo's house is that Bo is going to be like, the go-between Carson and Jake, because Jake's sister and his parents are going to be home, and it's going to be hard to kind of conceal the plan. And because Carson's sister is going to a party, Bo is the likely suspect, because he lives with his grandmother, it appears, and his grandmother, there's some hints that she might be the little girl from the prologue that saw what happened to Mr. Windsor. So that kind of plays into it a little bit later on in the movie. But essentially, Kate gets this idea to kind of snoop around and check the, social media of Jake and her brother and all that. And they find the thing that Jake said, booyah on, and it was a picture on Spirit Halloween's Instagram. So she has a inkling that they're going to be in there. And she eventually makes her way there, breaks in through the roof to try to find them. And meanwhile, the boys have now hidden in like the employees only room, trying to hide from this animatronic played by Christopher Lloyd. Now, if you look on the cover, you see all these different animatronics. You have like a skeleton guy, a guy with like a saw for a hand, a creepy demonic looking teddy bear, and a demon looking thing with an open mouth. Essentially, Christopher Lloyd's voice is put into these animatronics. And how the plot describes is that his soul possesses these animatronics, and the kids over time in the movie find out why he's doing this, but we'll get into that in just a minute. So they're hiding out, and Kate's looking around for him, and she eventually finds the boys who are saying, hey, these animatronics are alive, and then she gets acquainted with the skeleton creature, and she's like, yeah, maybe this is real. Or maybe it's the teddy bear. So there's a scene where the boys, they pick up like some dart guns, and they shoot down or take out this skeleton that Christopher Lloyd's initially possessing. And then he possesses the teddy bear. And then there's a comedic scene where they're trying to get through the roof to get out of the building because they're scared of being in there. And they leave Bo there, and then they have to go rescue him. So they grab a dart gun and shoot the teddy bear. And they run back into the room they were in previously. And then for the rest of the movie, it kind of starts dragging a little bit. So like, they're in the room, and Christopher Lloyd is just there in a teddy bear thing, trying to get through the door, but his spirit is possessing it, so why can't he just throw his spirit through the door? I don't know. It's weird stuff like that. But the kids find like a trap door inside of the room that leads underground, so they decide to go in there to hide out and find an exit to get out a different way. And Christopher Lloyd finally gets an idea to change out of the teddy bear and get into another costume with hands, but it turns out it's the buzzsaw hands, and when he gets into the room, he realizes that the door is closed and he needs something with an actual grip. So then he possesses the final animatronic of the movie, which is this demonic thing to explore the caverns underneath. So the kids wind up in the cavern. Meanwhile, Rachel Lee Cook, the mom of Jake, thinks that something is wrong. So she decides to go out looking to find answers, and pretty much her subplot for the rest of the movie is trying to find Jake and Jake's friends, right? But while their kids are down there, they find this creepy looking cavern with a house underneath, and they venture into the house and they find some answers about Mr. Windsor and what may have happened to him. And they realize that this curse placed on him has more to it. While he can possess animatronics, it's on the date of his death, so it's implied that he died on Halloween all those years ago, and he's only allowed to come back on the anniversary of his death, and he can possess inanimate or living beings. Inanimate objects, I should say. So they kind of piece it together and realize that what he's trying to do is possess one of the kids, so after the clock strikes midnight, he can possess their body forever, and the kid that gets taken over, their spirit will be displaced in a similar fashion that Mr. Windsor's spirit was. So the kids realize that they're pretty much having their souls hunted out of them, which is kind of dark. And I'm gonna skip over this to get ahead of spoilers. I don't want to get into anything else here. So the kids, they have this interaction with Windsor's spirit that's possessing this creepy little animatronic, and one of the kids maybe perhaps falls victim to getting possessed, and time starts to wind down, and the remaining kids have to figure out how to save the day and figure it out. And there's a callback to an item that Jake had from his father that's a good setup and payoff, and the kids may or may not be able to stop what's happening, and you get like this coming of age, moving on type of ending, and that's essentially where I'll leave you there. I'm not going to get into too many details, but that's essentially what you're going to expect out of Spirit Halloween, the movie. Now, before we go any further, I kind of want to share something here. This special collector's edition Blu-ray came with limited edition character cards, and I can give you the names of these animatronics because I don't know them off the top of my head. Okay, so they came with these cards here, and they have like Spirit Halloween, the movie on the back, which is kind of cool. So you have Buzzsaw, Mr. Dark, Nightcrawler, and Teddykins of Terror. What a name. So these are the animatronics that Mr. Windsor possessed in the movie, and I guess are staple Hallmark animatronics at Spirit Halloween. I'm sorry if I don't know more about that. I've never been into, cataloging that stuff. But that's cool that this little Blu-ray came with it. And yeah, off the bat, I should say this. This movie is very much in the veins of Goosebumps storytelling, or Are You Afraid of the Dark storytelling from the 90s. And I can appreciate that off the bat, especially because modern kids' horror films are getting into that Goosebumps 2015 territory, or getting into that Disney cheese vibe. Not saying that this movie isn't cheesy, it isn't low budget, but there's a lot of charm in the execution of it. And I can say this off the bat, this was a tremendous positive for me going into this, because having a little innocent Halloween kids horror film just to divulge into was kind of refreshing. I find it ironic, again, that this was PG-13 when it was theatrically released, like R.L. Stine's Zombie Town, because minus a few scenes that kind of got a little dark, this could have been a PG movie. And then again, if this had a higher budget, or maybe a bigger studio and they were willing to go a bit darker with it, it could have been even better in that department. But I do think that this film had a lot of charm, and it hit what I wasn't expecting for it to hit. standout performances in this movie were definitely Rachel Lee Cook when she was in the film. She had a handful of scenes, and she did kind of play a role in the story in some significant way, but it was really nice to see her in a role after not seeing her in many things over the years. So that was nice. And then seeing Christopher Lloyd play pretty much the villain of the story was kind of cool. And I think Mr. Windsor, unlike the zombie creatures and Mr. Carver from Zombie Town, I keep comparing it, but they're similar movies that came out, or I shouldn't say similar movies, but similar genre movies that came out within a year of each other. I do think that Mr. Windsor actually poses a threat in the story, to the point where I think the final act and how that builds up was quite entertaining. I do think that the characters here, despite some shoddy acting, which I'll get into in the negatives, the characters here, while they are cliche and kind of stock, definitely had more layers to them than I was expecting. I think Jake's character had a lot of emotional sympathy, and it actually got to me a little bit. I got that reveal near the end with Jake and his realization of him maybe coming to a decision to start moving on from his father's death was very emotional, and I was not expecting that. And the animatronics here, for the most part, when they are in the film, there's a blend of CGI and practical, it looks like, but they were creepy, and if I was a younger kid, I would have been really creeped out. And the setting of it taking place majorly inside of this Spirit Halloween, when it was good, it was fun. In the caverns underneath the property was really creepy and eerie, and there's some really good shots with some of these animatronics in this movie, particularly with Nightcrawler, and now that I know his name. Nightcrawler here was probably the creepiest one. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of positives to be had. Story, I guess, is another one. It's kind of basic and not a lot to it, but the runtime was 81 minutes. It flew by. That's beginning with opening credits and the end credits. Comparing it to like 93-minute films that seem to be the going rate for these kids' horror movies these days, this movie had a fantastic pace that kind of helped its basic premise, which I'll give it that. But getting into the negatives, I'm gonna start off with the acting performances. The girl who played Kate was pretty good, but the three boys, Bo, Carson, and Jake, they had some moments of pretty good line delivery, but there are some scenes where they underact, or I don't know if it's their voice or just how they behave, but it just gets to that cringy territory. not overly cringy like some other things I've seen recently, but they weren't the greatest acting that I've seen come out of these type of movies recently. And that actually stems to Christopher Lloyd, unfortunately. I love that he's in this movie, and I love that he plays the villain, and I do think that he is fun for the most part, but the comedy of this film, I didn't really mention that in the plot overview, but they definitely use him for comedy in the back half, and it's kind of unexpected, and some of these animatronics that are on the case barely get used. Primarily Buzzsaw. I think Buzzsaw and the skeleton, was it Mr. Bones, whatever, they get used the least. And the ones we do see the most are pretty much the teddy bear and the skin crawler one. I think Teddy Bear has the most screen time, whatever his name is. But oh my lord, how depressing the fight sequences of these kids trying to attack these animatronics is kind of hilariously bad. Like the scene with the teddy bear when they're trying to shoot it with pretty much Nerf guns is so dumb, and they play it up like such a scary event that I had to question what I was watching. And that was the point of the movie where I'm like, okay, they really didn't know what to do here. Because you have kids in the movie, they're 12 to 13 year olds. why give them real weapons to use? Because that's just going too far, right? Very cartoonish in some areas of the film, and I think where it counted, it just it goes back to my similar complaints with Zombie Town. It's just it leans into the comedy more than the horror, unfortunately. And you wouldn't expect that in a movie set in Spirit Halloween, advertised to be around the animatronics that are actually scary in the stores, and they make them not scary. That seems kind of counterproductive. So that was another blatant one for me for negatives. And I'll say this. These low budget films, and I don't mean any disrespect to the producers of this movie. I don't mean any disrespect to Billy Bates or David Pogue here. But it feels like Spirit Halloween just flipped the bill to like help fund the producing of this movie. Gave them the license to their name to put on it so they can make a movie. And it feels like Spirit Halloween themselves want nothing to do with this film. And that kind of tells a lot, because this negative, it's not really a thing I can hold against the movie, but it's the fact that the own retail establishment that funded the film, that saw this movie to get made and allowed it to get made, won't sell it in their retail establishments. And that seems like a red flag to me, because in a lot of ways, this movie reminds me of those old Wacky Adventures of Ronald McDonald's tapes that you used to be able to buy in McDonald's in the late 1990s and early 2000s. But you can only buy them there, and they definitely owned up to their own material they were releasing. In this case, it's kind of like the equivalent of if those Ronald McDonald tapes back in the day were sold exclusively in Kmart or everywhere else besides McDonald's. That's how you have to get this movie. You have to get it on streaming platforms or buy the physical from other retailers outside of Spirit Halloween. And to be honest, majority of the clientele that go to this retail establishment are probably people looking for more adult horror things, and I can kind of see the embarrassment they would have putting out a family-friendly film for their establishment. Because they do sell kids products there. But good Lord, can you at least stand behind what you fund? Or, I get it. You're a seasonal business. You don't have a lot of money to put into the production. You might be embarrassed of how low budget it is or how kid-friendly it turned out. But come on, man. You hyped this movie up, and then it was kind of like a nightmare to track down when it first released digitally. I had to buy it on YouTube of all places. Yeah, YouTube. Go figure. But that's also an annoyance with it. It's just like Spirit Halloween themselves seem like they want nothing to do with it. Which is a shame, because they actually put out a half-decent film here. And if we want to get into it, one last negative, there are some things about the story that feel kind of plot convenience-ish, that get kind of mulled over, that don't really make much sense. I can go back to the whole thing with Christopher Lloyd when he possesses animatronics and he's separated just from a door frame between him and these kids. He can't separate himself from the animatronic just to slip through the door and take one of these kids. I mean, it's just really silly. And the whole thing, the reveals in the back half, there's a bunch of exposition dump. And there's a couple of things dealing with the curse that don't make much sense. And how his spirit is confined is very loose, but it is explained, so I can't be too mad at it. But when you think about it, some of the stuff just doesn't add up. But I think that's the film's least worrisome problems, because for the most part, actually, I do think that there was enough explanation here to make it sort of airtight to an extent. But nonetheless, those negatives do add up for me altogether. If I had to say where I was thinking, I think this is a step above R.L. Stine's Zombie Town, unironically, but not by much. When I'm thinking grade-wise, I was leaning a D+ to C- with this movie. It's definitely just fine to pushing decent. It's like a decent film. So from like a 0 to 5-star basis, I decided to be lukewarm with it and just give it like 3.5 out of 5 stars and only deduct 1.5 for those issues, because those issues were kind of smaller medium to medium issues I had that did kind of add up. So it gets a C-. It's a light, very, very, very light good, but I'm going to say just flat out decent film. There's nothing really to be too mad at. It could have been way better. The fact that, you know, going back to the whole PG-13 rating, yeah, it could have benefited from a little more darker tones in it instead of going the whole comedic route. I think that's a problem modern kids horror is suffering from as a whole. I can't really pigeonhole the problem just to this film. It's across them all, basically. But yeah, if you haven't seen Spirit Halloween, the movie, definitely go stream it before you buy it on physical. If you want it in your physical collection because it fits the subgenre, go ahead. But I definitely recommend that you watch it before you buy it and see if you want to have it in your collection. But I would actually recommend that you go see this film. It might score lower, it might score higher for you, because at the end of the day, this is essentially a marketing ploy for kids or families to, you know, express their loyalty of brand recognition to Spirit Halloween. It was made for that reason, and it unapologetically is that. But it managed to deliver, in my opinion, a decently fun time, and I can't be too mad with it. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Spirit Halloween, the movie. Let me know down in the comment section if you've seen this movie before. Do you love this or do you hate this? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.